Hello, I'm Steve Boyce with INXPO, and welcome to INXPO TV. We're here on the Thought Leadership channel today to have part 2 of our Webcasting 101 series, Tips for Planning and Executing Your Webcast. And in just a moment, I'm going to be introducing our featured speaker. But before we do, I want to make sure you're all set to enjoy the program today. Now, we're coming to you live from our studios in Atlanta, and we're on the Thought Leadership channel today, which is one of 3 channels on INXPO TV, INXPO's social business television network. In addition to Thought Leadership, we offer Tech Talk and Success Stories. We're thrilled you've joined us today, and thanks for tuning in. Now, we want to make sure you're ready to get started and enjoy the program. Our featured speaker, Jenn Gibson, is a webcasting rock star. So let's use this opportunity to chat with her and have a great conversation today. So we've included a group chat area. Please feel free to enter your comments or thoughts and ideas to share with Jenn and the group. We look forward to your participation in our program, so please make good use of the chat area. Secondly, we know you've got questions about webcasting. It's a great topic, and Jenn is just packed with great information and tips and best practices. So we'd love to get your questions. We've included an Ask a Question bar at the bottom of your console. So please feel free to type your question in there and hit enter when you're done. Jenn and I will try to get to as many of your questions as we can during the program, and of course we've left a few minutes at the end to take care of any additional questions. Now, in addition to the chat and ask a question bar, there are other content widgets within your console. And of course, you can adjust those to suit your particular viewing preferences. So all you have to do is maximize or minimize the windows, or close them, move them around your screen to suit your preferences. There are a series of icons at the bottom of your console, which also lead to additional content elements. So we hope you go ahead and take a minute or two right now to set up your console to suit your viewing preferences and get all ready for our program. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our featured speaker today. And again, Jenn is going to be providing our second in a series here on Webcasting 101. So we have Jenn Gibson, who is a sales engineer within INXPO. And Jenn focuses on webcasting strategy and execution for clients so that they can maximize audience engagement and value creation through their webcasts. Jenn's been heavily involved in the development and the product management teams to continue to enhance INXPO's own webcasting solution, XPOcast. Now, prior to becoming a sales engineer, Jenn's held almost every position here at INXPO that you can imagine around products and webcasting. She was an event director and also managed our webcasting department. And over that time, she's probably personally executed thousands of webcasts. So she's got tremendous depth of experience in this area, and we're thrilled to have Jenn on the program. On a personal note, back a few years ago in 2008, Jenn was my executive producer, and she helped to drive 5 very successful career and education fairs when I was with Monster.com. And boy, it seems like a long time ago, Jenn, but it's great to be here on air with you on INXPO TV. Now, I want to go ahead and welcome Jenn to the program. Jenn Gibson, thanks for joining us on the Thought Leadership channel today. Why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Steve. We do go way back, so it's good to have you now working on the same side and moderating today's session for me. So as Steve said, ask me all the questions you want. I'm happy to answer whatever it is most important to you guys. The main thrust of today's presentation is to really talk about, so you've been asked to do a webcast, and now what happens next? How do you get from you've been asked to successful execution of that session? So what I want to talk about first is what I see as the typical process that folks go through when they've been told that they're going to be giving a webcast or agreed to do it. And then hopefully we can get you from what I see as what people normally go through to a more easy process, a less stressful process. So usually people get asked to do a webcast, they feel pretty excited, they feel pretty honored, and they feel real good about it, you know, and they're excited to do it. And then panic sets in. And all of a sudden they start thinking, well, what am I going to say? Do I have something I can use? Do I have to create a new deck? What am I going to do? And then where am I going to get the content from? Who needs to approve this? What happens on a live day if I can't handle the questions? You know, I'm going to have to rearrange my schedule. I'm going to have to move meetings. You know, I'm going to have to do all of these things, and then on top of all of that, I hate the way I sound, and I hate being on webcam, and I hate doing all of those things, and why did I even agree to do this in the first place? And then usually what happens is they go, well, at least it's not for 3 more weeks. Whew, I can worry about this later. And they worry about it about the night before, maybe when the show host starts hounding them for content and they throw something together at the last minute and it adds extra stress to everybody's schedule. So what I want to do is get you from a place of stressful procrastination to it's easy. I know what the plan is, I know what I'm doing, and I'm just working on it a little bit throughout, and everyone's on the same page with what's going to happen. So the first thing to remember is that you're the expert. They've asked you to present on something because you have a unique perspective or because you have knowledge that other people don't have on the presentation. So from that perspective, the content is the easy part. You know what you're going to talk about, you know your product, you know your industry, you know whatever it is about the topic, because that's why they've asked you to speak. So really after that, it's a matter of just getting it down on paper and figuring out what the show host wants. So my first question to you is go ahead and type in the polling question here, or answer the polling question here. So instead of panicking, what do you think the first step might be in actually getting that webcast off the ground? You know, is it talking to your colleagues to see what they want to hear or what they would want to see from a presentation? Is it meeting with the show host to see what their needs are? Do you just start working on the content right away so that you aren't doing it the night before? Or do you think you're probably just still going to wait till the night before and start panicking then? So go ahead, take another minute or so to answer that, and then I'll go ahead and push out those results. So we're getting some good results in. Looks like it's pretty evenly split between a couple here, so I'm going to go ahead and push out those results to everybody. So we've got about 2/3 of the audience saying meet with the show host and about 1/3 saying get ideas from colleagues. So I would agree mostly with the folks that said meet with that show host. To me, that's the most important first step you can take. So when I'm getting ready to do a webcast, the first thing I do is I sit down with the folks who asked me to do the webcast and get the basics out of the way. And what that means is, and this is going to sound really simple, but you'd be surprised how easily this is to throw people off. Find out what day and time the webcast is. That's step number one. And a step that people often forget is that we live in a really global society now. Find out what time zone they think the presentation is going to be in, and then show up in the time zone that they've asked you to. More often than not, I've seen someone who they think that someone's in the same time zone as them, but they're really talking to someone who's based in California, they're based in New York, all of a sudden they're showing up late to a presentation, you know, so you need to make sure that you know exactly what the time zone is. And then remember that you can't just show up at the time the webcast starts. There's some pre-planning that needs to be done, so find out what the expectation is in terms of when you should show up for the live day. Usually it's about 30 minutes before, sometimes it's an hour before, but make sure you know so you can block that time on your schedule in advance. And then find out when the dry run's going to be. You're always going to do a practice session, and if they don't have one scheduled, ask if you can do one. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit here, but find out when the dry run is, because that's going to help inform when you work on the content. It's going to help inform, your schedule and making sure that you're planned and prepared for all of the requirements from the show host. And then find out when the deadlines are. When is your abstract due? When do they need a title? When do they need the presentation? When do they need the handouts? Make sure that you know all of those things. And what I do is I always put a calendar reminder on my calendar the 24 hours before as well as the day of, so that I'm getting those pop-up reminders about when I'm supposed to get that content into them, and I have no excuses for getting it in late. So those are my first steps. Once I kind of have the nuts and bolts down, I've got everything on my calendar, I've got it all written down, the next thing I ask, and I find this is the thing that gets skipped over most frequently, is who is coming to this presentation? Now, I can give a presentation on webcasting to just about anybody, but my webcasting presentation is different based on who's going to be there. For example, if I'm giving a presentation to a group of folks who run webcasts all the time, I'm not going to start off with webcasting basics. I'm going to go into more detailed things based on their knowledge level, based on their experience. So find out who the audience is, what their knowledge level on the subject is, so that way you can tailor your content around who's going to be there. The other important thing is finding out where they are. Now this is going to sound a little bit strange, but are they all located from the same company? So you want to talk to things that are relevant to just that company? Are they all over the place, so that you're going to be more generic in the types of things that you say rather than specifying certain company policies? And then, are they international? Are they domestic? Where is everybody located? Now, that's important for not only your content development, but it's also important to know from a standpoint of the actual things that the elements that you're going to include. For example, if I have a heavily Asia-Pac based audience, I may not include as much video because usually their bandwidth is a little bit lower, so it's not going to be viewed as well there. So I want to use content that is relevant and is able to be seen by all of the audience. The next thing to keep in mind is how are they going to access that session. So everyone's got iPads, tablets, mobile devices, computers. We're all on something different. So you need to build your content around what people are going to be viewing it on. Now, if your show host knows that most of your audience is coming in on an iPhone or an Android device, that means that you have about a business card sized screen to work with. So you don't want to have really text heavy presentations. You want to do something that's more visual so that it's easily seen on the smaller screens. You also want to find out what elements are available and supported from that provider on those mobile devices. For example, I know that in some cases animations on PowerPoint slides are supported on PCs but not supported on the mobile devices. That's important to know because you want to make sure that your slides look right on every device. So I've been talking for a little while now. I want to take a little break and turn it over to you, Steve, to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate that. We sure do have some questions, and just want to encourage our audience to keep the questions coming. Feel free to go ahead and type those in the Ask a Question area, and as you can see, Jen and I are going to make sure that we spend some time answering your great questions because this is our Webcasting 101 series. We want to provide you some really great general best practices and tips as Jen's been doing so far. So, Jen, I've got two questions I've selected for this particular segment. The first relates back to your comments about knowing your audience. And we have a question from Jane. Jane's curious, if I don't know much about my audience before my broadcast, what can I do during my program to learn more about them? Is a poll question, for example, a way to learn about who's in my audience?
Absolutely. So polling questions are a great way to learn more about your audience. You could also use, for example, we have the group chat here. I can find out more about them there. The key is that as you're using those tips and tricks, to take that into account and then use that in your presentation. Don't just ask for the sake of asking. Make sure you're using that to inform your presentation. Something else I've seen a lot of success with is having a display slide. So for example, you guys came in today and there was the thought leadership slide that was up. But maybe you have a display slide that's a couple of polling questions or a survey that during that early entrance time or the pre-call, the speaker is then reviewing and getting to know their audience a little bit better before the presentation begins. So that way they can kind of tailor and move things around as they need to before it even starts. So back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Jen. That's fantastic. And just a quick nod to Todd Hansen, who's joined us in the audience. Todd, welcome. Todd was a previous featured guest on our Thought Leadership channel. He's president of ROI of Engagement and really has some fantastic insights around ROI on these kinds of programs. So we would certainly encourage our audience to check out his website as well. And I make special note of Todd because I think he had the same question that Jane did as well on the audience. So Jen, thanks for your comments and suggestions there. I do have one more question and then we'll let you take it to your next segment after you're done answering. So this question comes from Paul. Paul's curious, with audiences coming in from all over the world and on so many different devices, is it possible to give everyone in the audience the same experience?
The answer is absolutely, but you have to know what your options are. So if you are trying to, build a really robust and exciting and engaging presentation on the PC side of things, make sure you've talked to your show host to see if all of the elements and aspects that you're trying to include are also available on the mobile devices. So it's really critical that the experience that your PC users isn't amazing and then it's a little lackluster for the mobile folks. So for me, and this, Robin will address your question there that I see in the chat as well. For me, I know that on mobile devices that, for example, I don't want to include really text-heavy slides, like I said. So I don't want to do that because that's not going to help mobile users out. I also know that if I'm delivering my webcast on a webcam, there's some mobile devices that can't handle that plus a video slide. The audio doesn't play correctly. So I wouldn't want to include a video clip if I was working toward a heavily mobile audience. So those are the kinds of things that you want to keep in mind, and it really, luckily, feeds into the next thing I wanted to talk about here, which is, getting to know your software. It's really important that you work with your show host, work with your engineer. You know, I've got Eli behind the scenes here helping me out with everything today. Work with them to know what your options are. So does the software allow you to do polling questions? And if they do, you know, is it single select? Is it multi-select? Can you include video clips? Can you do a survey before, during, or after the presentation? Is group chat an option? You know, are they going to be heavily using social media? You know, do you need to take Twitter into account? And then as you're building your content, incorporate those things into the presentation, you know, and do it organically. Don't just have it, but do it in a way that really enhances your presentation. And I don't want to dive too deeply into building your content today. I really want to focus on the process of getting from point A to point B with running a webcast, but definitely come back next week. Next Thursday, Carmen Tran from Rexy Media, she's going to be doing her whole session on actually building that content and creating engaging presentations. So definitely make sure to tune in for that. But for today's purposes, in terms of content creation, what you really want to do is first know your options, and again, you know your options for all of the devices, and then take them into account when you're building your content. One thing that I like to do is ask the show host, you know, what's worked for them in the past? What have they seen successes with? What have they seen their audience not really liking? And then I use those things more frequently. I also like to find out if they know what the audience's learning style is. For example, if I'm delivering a presentation to a group of engineers, they tend to be a much more visual group of people, so I may want to include more screen sharing for those people. But if I'm delivering to a group of executives, they're likely on the go, they are likely on a mobile device, so I'm going to keep it a little more visual for them, you know, with basic slides, and then try to keep my audio and my video, you know, really engaging for them. So, you know who your audience is and know how they like to learn, and then use those things as you're creating your content. So next, before I get into my next group of tips and tricks, I wanted to ask you guys, what scares you most about presenting online? Now, I know that no one gets excited to be on webcam, you know, but it is a really fun way to give a presentation. So what is it that would make you shy away from giving a webcast online? You know, is it forgetting what you're going to say, that your computer isn't great, that you're going to look bad? You know, it's a multi-select. Go ahead and select as many of the answers as you would like, and then we'll go ahead and push out the results. So, all right, we've got some good results coming in here, pretty spread out. All right. So what I want to do with this question too is give you ways that you can make sure that anything that scares you, you can plan for. So I'm going to go ahead and push these results out here. So it looks like a little bit of everything. No one's worried about talking too much or too little. That's good. You know, you are the expert. You do have the content knowledge. But I would say, you know, it looks like everyone's kind of got something that they're worried about. Now, what I would say is this, you know, things go wrong. Everyone has something come up. And I think that's really well illustrated by this clip here.
That concludes tonight's debate from here in Nashville. We want to thank our hosts here at Belmont University in Nashville and the Commission on Presidential Debates. And you're in my way of my script. Senator McCain, thank you very much, Senator Obama. You're in my way if you will move. There is one more presidential debate on Wednesday, moderated by my friend Bob Schieffer of CBS News. Thank you, Senator McCain. Thank you, Senator McCain.
So I love that clip. I think it's hilarious, and I think that it really illustrates a couple of different things. One, even the best of us have things go wrong during a presentation, and it's how you react to it. You know, I'm sure that then Senator Obama and Senator McCain were told exactly what to do in that moment, you know, and he just had to roll with it. He had to make the best of it. It was live TV. He had to do what he had to do. So, you know, those things come up for everyone. But the difference is that he was prepared, he was planned, and he had a knowledge of what he was going to do, you know, should something like that happen. And that's what I say, is being prepared is key. So we're all going to pretend we're just like Boys and Girl Scouts here, and we're going to earn our badges. First, don't miss your deadlines. This is, you know, it's annoying for your show host. You know, they would like to get things in, set up, ready to go on their end, but it adds stress for you. You know when a deadline is coming up, you know when it's looming, and then you know when it has blown by you, and it has missed it, and it's just eating at you, and then you start putting it off more and more because now you've got to get it done, and you're worried about it, and you're nervous, and it just adds more and more stress to everybody's schedule. So know your deadlines, put them on your calendar, and plan ahead for them. And then rehearse. Get to know your content. Get to know it so well that you don't need the slides. So make sure that you've gone through everything a bunch of times, and if everything were to go down, that you still know your content well enough that you could pick up the phone, dial in through the phone, and give your entire presentation without any kind of visual aid. And then have notes. You don't want to have a ton of them. You don't want to be like rustling through papers during your presentation, but just have a few notes, put them up in front of you so that you're always looking forward into the camera, and then just kind of keep those going throughout the presentation. If you have access to it, use a teleprompter, use cue cards, whatever it is that'll help you stay on track during the presentation. I try to keep my slides pretty sparse, but I use those as my visual reminders for what I wanted to talk about on that particular slide. Next, plant seed questions. This is good for a couple of reasons. If you're giving a presentation on a topic where there's a lot of content that you're not going to want to talk about, or certain questions that you're not going to want to answer, planting seed questions allows you to just answer the questions that you think will come up, but that are you can actually answer without having to sidestep anything. Also, if your audience is slow to type in questions during the Q&A period, it gives you something to talk to while you're waiting for the rest of your audience to type in their questions. Do a full dry run. This is really important. Run through everything. You'll get familiar with the software, you'll get to know the engineer, you'll be able to practice everything, you'll see how you look on webcam, you'll see what everything looks like, you'll know if you need to go somewhere else, you'll know if you need to get new equipment. You'll have all of that stuff taken care of. So doing a full dry run is really important. And if you feel like it, if you feel you need it, and you need to do more than one, ask the show host to set up more than one for you. More often than not, they're definitely going to accommodate that for you. And then test your equipment. This is critical. Make sure your webcam works, your microphone works, your computer works. Make sure it's all working and that it's compatible with the software that you're using. And then this is really important as well. Be in the same place using the same equipment for all of your dry runs and practice sessions as you're going to be for the live day. Now, being in the same place may be hard if you're traveling a lot, but make sure your show host is aware of that. That way you can plan for it. Bandwidth changes, network availability changes, all of those factors play into having a successful webcast. So just make sure you have an open line of communication with your show host about exactly what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, so that way they can also be prepared for any changes. And then hardwire your connection. The internet is a fickle thing. It goes up, it goes down, it's fast, it's slow, depending on what else is happening on the network at that time. If you're hardwired, it's less likely to drop that Wi-Fi connection. So definitely always be in a place where you can be hardwired to the internet. And then know your support procedures. Know what happens if, all of a sudden the buttons to change slides aren't working. Know what happens if, your audio can't be heard. So know how you're going to get in contact with your engineer or your show host during the session. And if something does go wrong, don't announce it to the audience. Know your support procedure well enough so that you don't have to become flummoxed on screen and say, well, it looks like we're having technical errors, or I can't change the slides. Your audience doesn't really want to hear that. It makes everything kind of seem like, it's a little bit broken, this is weird. Just keep going, keep talking, and make sure you're using those lines of communication. For example, here I have a message feature that I can contact my show hosts with or the audience, and I also have a chat feature where I can talk to them privately as well. So know what those features are, and then have backup plans and practice them. So for example, our backup plan for this presentation is if things go down, the webcam were to go down, we'd pause the presentation, we'd dial into a phone bridge, we'd deliver the rest of the presentation over the phone. It'd be down for just a second, we'd be back up and running right where we left off. If I were to lose the ability to change slides, I would just say the phrase change slides and Eli would change them for me. And we've practiced all of those as well so that I know if it does come up, it's not the first time it's happening when I'm live to the audience. I've practiced that procedure so I know what I'm supposed to do in those situations. Now, more often than not, everything's going to go fine. 9 times out of 10, your webcast isn't going to have any problems, but you want to be prepared if something does come up. And then you also want to be prepared for the live day. So you've done all those things, you're ready to go, it's the live day. Make sure you show up on time. Have all of your stuff plugged in before your pre-call is supposed to start. So that way when you get on that pre-call, you've only got a few minutes. So it gives them time to do the sound check, the audio check, the video check, and then you can just review the process flow, review the support procedures, go through all of those things, and be ready to go. Also, have a bottle of water nearby so that in case you get parched, you can get a drink. And make sure you've let everyone who's around you know that you're giving a presentation so that they keep things quiet and they're not interrupting you during that session. So before I jump into the last part here and go to Q&A, I just wanted to see, Steve, if there are any more audience questions that we wanted to take now.
Sure are, Jen, and per your instructions, I've got my bottle of water handy here, a little on-air product placement for the Coca-Cola Company. I'm down here in Atlanta, so got to plug the local bottlers, but some great content, fabulous suggestions, and I love the graphic there with the little Boy Scout, because I think what you're suggesting, Jen, is that key to webcasting success is very much rooted in your planning and preparation. And so I've got a question about that. In addition to the sort of the technical and process suggestions around planning and preparation, should folks also prepare and plan for audience engagement? And if so, how can they do that? You suggested seeded questions, I think, which is one example. Any others come to mind?
Sure. So you want to plan ahead, other than polling questions. You want to do some polling questions like I've had here. You can do those in advance. A lot of systems allow you to ask those on the fly as well. So if you think of a good question, go ahead and ask that on the fly. You also want to build in points of the presentation where you can ask for the feedback from the audience, and then use that, have them type in the chat room. We've also seen really great success with including a quick survey or including a game in the presentation. So lots of things like that where you can include the audience. My experience is that I like to plan out my polling questions, plan out the points in the presentation where I'm going to look for that audience engagement. If I'm trying to read my slides, give my presentation, monitor the chat, monitor the Q&A all at the same time, it's going to get a little muddled, and I'm going to spend a lot of my time just reading the screen. But as long as I know when I want to build those in, I can make sure that I have content to keep the presentation moving, but also still address those speaker questions or those audience questions. Any other questions right now, Steve?
That's great, Jen. We do, and it makes a lot of sense that with a little bit of advanced thought and preparation, you can really slot in those opportunities for audience engagement. Of course, things happen organically, as we well know, but to have a plan for that, you can ensure that you can keep that audience fully engaged throughout the program. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just simply read Todd's question out of the chat area. Todd's curious, Jen, in your experience, what is the most common reason that a webcast gets derailed? Is it technical? Is it something to do with the speaker? What have you seen?
I think it goes back to what you pointed out earlier and what I was talking about on that little Boy Scout slide, is that people aren't prepared. I've seen in a lot of cases where, instead of showing up to the dry run, someone will send their assistant because they think the only thing that the dry run is good for is checking out the webcam. To me, you've got to know what you're doing, you've got to know that content, and you've got to put the time in. You're giving a presentation, not just for you, but also when you give a presentation, you're representing yourself, the company you're working for, as well as the host. So there's a lot of people who are depending on you, really giving the best presentation and putting your best foot forward. So to me, people who don't plan and just wait until the last minute and throw anything together, those are the ones that usually have the most problems or have the least interesting sessions. So to me, the key is all the planning steps and making sure that you hit those deadlines and communicate with your show hosts. Take one last question now before we jump on to the next part.
Sure thing. Actually, I've got two, if I could sneak them in. I know we're pressed for time here. We've got one more segment, but Suzanne has a question I thought was good, and without getting too much into the content area, Jen, Suzanne's interested in knowing if your webcast is just going to be an on-demand program and not run live. Is there anything in addition to polling questions, which you might not do then, that you could do to really spice up the program or provide some variety for your on-demand audience?
Absolutely. So polling questions, you can still use them. They're a little bit harder to use on demand, but for an on-demand presentation, first the key is make sure your speaker's really, really engaging and lively, and then have some video clips in there. That really keeps people interested and engaged too. As long as you're changing up that content every 2 to 3 minutes, the users are usually staying focused in the presentation. Also, if you give them, handouts or things to do, things to kind of go with the presentation. For example, this presentation has a handout with it, and it's really meant for more of a takeaway. But for an on-demand presentation, I may have said, go ahead and open the handout and follow along with me, and maybe give them some activities to do during the presentation. I might pull up a link slide that actually takes them out to a specific website where they can interact with that website during the presentation. So some things like that really keep it going. Also, if you have the opportunity to include any kind of a game that is knowledge-based and based on what you're talking about, that'll keep them engaged as well.
Okay, great. I've got one more question here, Jen, and after you respond to this, feel free to go into your next segment. And this comes from Pam in Cleveland. Pam's curious, so with all the discussion about live versus sort of on demand, and with all the things that could go wrong during a live program, would you recommend just pre-recording everything so that it's perfect?
I get that question a lot, and I'd be curious to see what the audience thinks about that as well. So go ahead and type in the chat, if you prefer live to pre-recorded. My personal feeling on it is I think people like live. I can always tell when something's pre-recorded. I think most of the audience can. Usually they have a live Q&A afterwards, but I prefer to be able to know that the speaker is kind of taking questions throughout. I also think that there's a little bit of that SNL element to it. When you're watching Saturday Night Live, you're kind of waiting for them to laugh. You're waiting to see if something happens. And I don't think anyone's looking for anyone to fail by any means, but I think they can tell when it's live. They can tell, if the content is fresh, if the speaker's really into it, or if it's been really cleaned up and polished. So I'm just looking here in the audience here, and Robin's saying that she loves the live, it's more authentic. And then Todd's saying that he likes the notes that cover the talking points. I appreciate that as well, Todd. So, and that's what I'm doing here by looking into the chat room and talking to that. You can't do that during a pre-recorded. So it also takes away some of that ability to go where the audience wants you to go. So I know we're coming up on the end of our time here, so I want to make sure to move on to this one last point and then get a few more questions in before we wrap up here. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is that just because the presentation live portion is over doesn't mean that your responsibility as a good presenter has necessarily ended. Once a presentation is over, you want to go back to the show host to get their feedback on it. They have likely taken a survey, they likely have data metrics that they can pull, and I usually get a copy of those so that I can see where the highs and lows were in the presentation. I can see any questions that I didn't get a chance to answer and reach out to those folks. So I can get some ideas from the metrics there. And then, everyone hates when I say this, but I always go back and I watch the presentation again, and I see, did I say or ah? Did I pause awkwardly? Was I, not looking at the camera? Was I just kind of staring over here? Was I swiveling my chair? What were the mannerisms and things that I was doing that maybe I want to work on in the future to be a better presenter? So that kind of concludes everything I wanted to go through. But I'm happy to take your questions. I've got my email address on the screen there if anyone wants to reach out to me. But Steve, any questions from the audience that are still lingering?
Thanks, Jen. We do have a few, and folks, we're of course a little over our broadcast slot here, so I'm just going to offer you two, Jen. The first is, sometimes people don't receive all the final statistics or the input on their presentation perhaps until the day before the program, right? It might be updated company numbers or performance statistics or what have you. So given your advice for planning and preparing and having things completed in advance, any recommendations, Jen, for how to handle that kind of a situation where content may not be finalized until just before airtime?
Sure, that actually happens pretty frequently, especially in the ever-changing business world that we live in. And there, it really goes back to the communication with the show host. So you still want to do the dry run. You still want to get as much of your content in as possible, and then just let them know, slides 3, 7, and 12. Those are going to be updated, and make sure you understand what that drop dead is. Is it I can't get it in, it has to be in 24 hours in advance, or can you upload it an hour before? Everyone's going to be a little bit different on how flexible they can be in that. So it's really about open communication with whoever's, commissioned you to give that webcast, to make sure that you're still meeting their deadlines, but getting the most relevant and current numbers that you can out to the audience.
Fantastic. One final question, I think, speaks to something that you mentioned up top. A lot of people aren't comfortable being on camera. So, I hate being on camera, and it keeps me from actually giving presentations and offering more programs to my community. So any suggestions? How do you get comfortable? How is it just a matter of practice and familiarity with the technology and the tools? What can folks do to make sure they're comfortable giving online presentations?
Sure. So there's a couple of tips that I would give. First, presenting to an empty room is awkward. I am sitting alone in a room right now. There's a window I can see my coworkers walking by on, but it is awkward to present online. What I did when I was first starting out is I would give my presentations via the telephone rather than webcam, and that gave me a chance just to get comfortable talking to an empty room, to get comfortable using the software, to get used to the experience of online, and that way I didn't have the added pressure of watching myself present. Once I got a little bit more comfortable with that after the first few sessions, then I started inviting people into the room with me so that I was actually presenting to them rather than to no one. And then I would ask them for feedback about how I did. And then this is a good suggestion as well. When you want to see how you're doing, but you may not have your webcam up, or maybe don't have access to the software right away, give your presentation to yourself in the mirror. It sounds weird, but it allows you to not only practice your content, which is good, but it also allows you to see the facial expressions you're making. It allows you to see a lot of different things that you might not even notice that you're doing. And then this is critical, for every aspect. Just always ask for feedback. I have a very good friend who is very honest with me all of the time, and so whenever I'm nervous about anything or I'm not sure of how it sounds, I'll give her the presentation, and that way she's in a completely different industry from me. She'll be able to tell me, one, does the content make sense, and two, did I look good giving it? Did I sound good giving it? Did I have too many pauses or awkwardness? And she's brutally honest, so if she doesn't like it, then I know I have something to fix. If she likes it, then I know it was good and I can give it to everybody else. But it's just about asking for feedback and practicing and getting comfortable with that medium.
Thank you so much, Jen. Well, I think we're going to have to stop it right there because we're several minutes actually over our allotted time, and I'm sure our audience needs to get back to important work in their days. And we certainly appreciate Jenn Gibson and her expert advice on webcasting, tips for planning and executing your webcast. I think Jen shared really dozens of great tips. And again, I think the focus is really on planning and preparation. So if you can follow Jen's advice and her wonderful tips, you should really have a very successful program or programs. Obviously, you should also look to your webcast provider for best practices and so forth to help support your programming going forward. So, Jen, thank you very much. On behalf of our audience, I just want to thank you for all of that great content. And again, reminder to our audience, Jen has prepared a special handout, which includes many of her talking points that didn't appear on the slides on camera here today. So I would encourage you to download that simply from the icon below in your console. And there's some great tips and tricks that you can take back home to yourself and your coworkers. Now, little program note, folks, before we jump off air, I do want to remind you all that two program notes, actually. One, feel free to email Jenn Gibson if you've got any additional questions. You can see her email there at jgibson@inexpo.com. And I know Jen would be thrilled to get any additional questions or interaction with you, so please do feel free to take advantage of that opportunity. And want to remind folks that we are in a 4-part series here, and so we want to thank you, of course, for participating in our second episode of the Webcasting 101 series. We will be having 2 additional episodes, and those are going to appear next Thursday, December 13th, and the following Thursday, December 20th. They will both be at the same time, noon Eastern, 11 Central. I can't do the math on Pacific. Dennis will have to do that for me, but please do mark your calendars for those great programs. Next week, we'll feature Dr. Carmen Turan of Rexy Media. She'll be speaking on how to prepare your content. And she's got some wonderful advice and tips around the content elements. And then the following week, we'll be thrilled to join back to Thought Leadership Danielle Belmont from BNP Media to wrap up our Webcasting 101 series. So please do mark your calendars for those two great events. I would just want to thank Jenn Gibson again for wonderful best practices for planning and executing your webcast. And now on behalf of Eli and Jen and Dennis and the rest of the crew at INXPO, I'm Steve Boyce. Thanks for joining us on INXPO TV today.